Hi there, my name is Alex and I'm the Director of Education with the Canadian Institute of Home Inspectors. I want to thank you for joining us today. We're going to be doing an inspection on a 2006 home built in Crossfield, Alberta. A couple things I want to bring up before we start. First off, home inspections, they are not a safety code compliance inspection. Secondly, there are many ways of doing a home inspection. This is just one of them. So let's get started. When you begin your exterior inspection, you want to keep two things in mind. First off, you want to be able to inspect from afar as well as closely to the building because this is going to reveal different defects. Secondly, we recommend to start on one side of the home in one corner, do a complete loop, and then circle back the same way you came from to give you a different perspective for defects. When inspecting the driveway and the walkways, you want to check the condition for spalling, cracking, settlement, levelness, as well as slope away from the structure. Landings, entrances, and decks follow similar inspection processes. You want to confirm that the handrails and stair installation is compliant with the local having jurisdiction. You also want to be inspecting the siding, windows, and testing receptacles for GFI capabilities if they're present. Inspecting lights for presence, proper installation, and operation should also be done so. Now, it is very often that entrances may have building materials that block the inspection view of the structural components, so you want to make sure to indicate that in the report. If the home you're inspecting is equipped with an air conditioner unit, you want to make sure to test it as long as it's at least 16 degrees Celsius or warmer outside. The inspection process begins with checking the fins on the condensing unit for any sort of damage or debris. You want to inspect the suction line installation as well for damage. You want to take a look to make sure there's a dryer canister that's in good condition and also installed. Lastly, you want to be listening for any abnormal sounds that may sound like grinding or crushing, as well as checking the proper rating size of the breaker matching to the data plate. Alright, so now that we've finished the front portion of the home, we're going to be entering the backyard and we're going to start with the fence line. So things you want to be checking for are loose and leaning posts, any sort of rot or damage, vegetation, and of course you want to check the gate latches to make sure they're operating properly. When it comes to the grading at the house, you want to check the slope. Is it sloping away from the house? Is it flat? Or is it going towards the home? It's very common to find the grading being flat, and at this point you may want to recommend to the potential buyer that they increase the grading to slope it away from the house. One thing to always be mindful of is to check the grading of the neighboring properties, because if they slope towards the home you're inspecting, there's a chance that the water may intrude into that home. If you find poor grading around the house, you want to be extra vigilant when you're in the basement to check for any sort of water damage. So when it comes to downspouts and gutters, first off, you want to make sure that they're present. If they're present, check to make sure that they're attached properly, there is no damage to them, and that they're extending 4 to 6 feet away from the structure. Now, if you come across downspouts that go below grade, what you want to do is put a clause in your report to state that you're unable to inspect them unless, of course, that's been requested by the client, because you never know the condition of these downspouts that are below grade. We're going to be inspecting the siding here, also known as cladding. So a few things to be looking out for are any sort of areas that have missing siding, any sort of gaps in the siding where you don't have proper overlaps, depending on the orientation of the cladding. You want to be checking for any sort of mechanical damage and heat damage as well. So if there's a deck at the home and there's a barbecue in the way, make sure you pull it away from the house, because oftentimes you will see melted siding in this area. You also want to make sure that the clearance from the grade to the siding is adequate. Depending on your jurisdiction and the type of building materials, this will vary, so do your research to find out what is required. And of course, if you have any sort of wood siding, you want to be checking for any sort of rot and moisture intrusion. Alright, so now we're going to be inspecting a deck. So it's very important to pay extra attention to these structures because a lot of times it is built by the homeowner, so we often see a lot of defects. So things you want to be looking out for are stair installation practices such as riser height and tread length. You want to make sure that the handrails and balusters are properly installed and attached. Joist and ledger board securement is very important as well, because oftentimes we will see improper fasteners being used for these areas. You want to make sure the beam has been properly selected and supported as well. Footings, something we really want to be purposeful to check for if it's required. And of course, you want to make sure that we're probing for rot for any sort of areas that need to be replaced. So once you're on top of the deck, what you want to do is check not only the decking and continue checking the handrails, but you want to check some of the components as well, including the condition of the cladding, the windows and trim, GFIs, any receptacles and gas lines. When it comes time to inspect windows, there are a few things you want to be looking out for. First off, if there's any sort of damage to the windows, any failed window seals, improper installation, any sort of flashing detail defects, and of course clogged weep holes are very common to find during your window inspection. If the windows are made out of a wood frame, you want to be checking for any sort of rot and water intrusion as well. When it comes to exterior receptacles, there's a few things you want to be looking out for. First off, is there GFI protection? What is the condition of the covers? And of course the actual housing as well, if it's a good installation. When it comes to the exterior lighting on a house, there's a few things you want to be looking out for. First off, are they present? What is the condition of the housing? Do they have protective covers? Are the light bulbs actually rated for exterior use? And of course, you want to check for any sort of debris or critters inside, which can increase the chance of a fire. When it comes to retaining walls, there are a few things you want to be looking out for, especially depending on what the wall is made out of. You want to check for any leaning, damaged components, rotting, and cracks. When you're testing hose bibs and the supply is shut, you want to check with the sellers to make sure that it's okay for you to turn the supply valve on. When you test the operation, you want to be checking for leaks at the valve handle as well as the vacuum breaker assembly. You want to make sure the slope is away from the structure. If you don't have any vacuum breaker assemblies, you may want to suggest that they be installed. Now, one thing you would want to put in your inspection report is the fact that you're not able to see behind the wall if the basement is completed. So having a clause there that states that you're not able to check for any sort of leaks may help you down the road. So when it comes to vent termination points, there's a few things you want to be checking for. First off, you want to make sure that the vents are actually exhausting and there's adequate air movement. You also want to be checking for any sort of debris, because debris, of course, increases the chances of a home fire and also restricts the air movement of the appliance. Having a proper seal with the dryer vent flap is also very important to keep not only the weather but also the vermin out. So if the flap can't seal, then there's a chance that both of these can intrude inside the dwelling. So when it comes to HVAC termination points, you want to make sure that there's proper orientation of the vent terminals, as well as check for flashing and caulking details. When it comes to the gas meter, there are a few things you want to be inspecting. First off, check for any excessive rust on the gas piping. You want to make sure the unit is secured properly to the structure, and of course the distance of the vent regulator to the openings of the building. When it comes to inspecting a roof, safety is of utmost importance. What you want to do is review your standard practice to see what level of inspection is required. If you feel comfortable walking on a roof, you can use a ladder. If not, you can use a drone, telescopic pole, or even binoculars. When you're inspecting the gutters, first off, you want to make sure that they're even present. A lot of times homes will be missing them, and it's always recommended that they be installed. You want to check for debris, as debris reduces the flow of the water out of the system. You want to check for the slope, any sort of cracks and damage, and of course make sure they're actually secured in place. Now that we're on top of the house, we're going to be inspecting not only the roof covering materials, the shingles in this case, but also we're going to be checking for vulnerable areas, we're going to be checking for the flashing details. We're also going to be looking for any sort of vent penetration points. If you notice anything that looks suspicious, what you want to do is make a mental note so that when you're in the attic space, you can take a closer look in these areas for any sort of water damage and water intrusion. A couple items that are often overlooked during a home inspection are the roof ventilation and exhaust termination points. So you want to make sure that there is adequate roof ventilation if required for the roof line. And if there are exhaust termination points on the roof line, you want to make sure to turn on those appliances and confirm that they're actually venting out of the dwelling. If you come across a metal valley on a roof line, there's a few things you want to be checking for. First off, you want to make sure there's no damage. Any sort of holes or punctures should be pointed out, and any sort of fasteners down the center line should be pointed out as well, as this is a common water intrusion point.
The current building code does not require drip edge flashing to be installed on roof lines, however, it is recommended to be added. Generally, it is easiest to check for flashing while inspecting the gutters on your way up on the roof, but still check in random areas to confirm its presence.
Some roof lines that you inspect may have vulnerable areas. These may include butterfly roofs, dead valleys, or poor slopes within these valleys. When you also come across high to low slope transitions or changes in the roof covering materials, this may be problematic and cause water intrusion inside the house. So when you're doing the attic inspection, make sure to spend extra time in these areas to check for any sort of water damage. If the home you're inspecting has an attached garage, the inspection process is similar to that inside of a room. So you want to check the ceiling for any water marks or water damage. You want to check the windows for operation, any sort of damage and installation details, and you want to be checking the receptacles as well for operation. The vehicle door will be inspected as well, and we'll talk about that here shortly. When you're inspecting the vehicle door inside a garage, there are a few items you want to be checking for. First off, it's very common to find damage to the vehicle door panels, so you want to point those out in the report. If the door is made out of wood, you want to check for any sort of rot or water damage. You want to be looking out for any corrosion on the pulley system as well as any of the hinge points. You want to be checking the safety sensors as well. This includes the laser and the pressure sensors. We don't recommend using any objects except for your hand and possibly your foot to check for the laser beam. If you put any objects below the door and the sensors fail, this may cause damage to the door. You also want to check the pulley system as well. If the garage comes with a heater, what you want to do is make sure that it's actually functioning. So go ahead and turn it up a few degrees to make sure it engages. You want to be checking the termination seals to make sure that they're sealed against the exterior. You want to check the vent pipe as well for any sort of corrosion, pitting, and the slope as well. Now, if the garage has a landing, you want to inspect it as well, and the inspection is very similar to that of a deck construction. So you want to check for handrail and guard requirements, you want to be checking for proper stair construction, you also want to check that the proper joist size and ledger board selection has been made as well. Lastly, again, you want to check for the proper fasteners. It's very common to find deck screws being used and they're not shear rated. Man doors for attached garages should self-close to prevent vehicular fumes from entering the dwelling, as well as providing fire separation. You should also check the door as you would as any exterior entrance. Now, when you're about to start your interior inspection, we do recommend a few things. First off, we recommend that you go through the entire house and turn all the lights and open all the doors. That way you're going to get a really good feel of the layout of the house, so no surprises will come at you. When you're ready to start the interior inspection of your home inspection, it is now time to decide if you're going to run the appliances. Some standards or practices may require that you do so, others do not. As a home inspector, it's your decision if you're going to be running them, and this includes the dishwasher, the laundry facilities, as well as the refrigerator and range. When you're inspecting the dishwasher, what you want to start looking for are any sort of watermarks below the unit and around the unit. This may indicate an ongoing concern with the current appliance or maybe an issue from a past appliance that has been replaced. When you check inside the dishwasher, first look around the door seal for any deterioration or damage. You want to pull out the racks one by one to make sure the rollers are operating properly, and after the unit is done its cycle, take a look below the kick plate to make sure there's no active leaks. Now that we're inside the mechanical room, we're going to start our inspection with the furnace. This is one of the most common ways the homes are heated in Canada. When you take off the cabinet covers, you want to take a photo of the data plate. You want to check inside for debris, corrosion, watermarks, scorching, and listen for any sort of out of the normal noises. Now that we had a general inspection inside the furnace cabinet, what we want to do is operate the unit. So this includes turning up the thermostat 5 degrees, watching the firing sequence, and then using our gas detection devices to check for leaks. Now we're ready for a more in-depth inspection of the furnace. So this ensures that we have armored cable for the electrical wiring if required, making sure we have an electrical disconnect switch within reach. We want to make sure that we have a dirt pocket for the gas line. We want to make sure the gas line is bonded if it's metal, and make sure that we have a union for the gas valve as well. If the home you're inspecting is equipped with an HRV, ERV, or whole house fan, you want to make sure that it's operating properly. So turn on the unit, make sure it's exhausting out of the home. You want to check inside as well for any sort of debris, making sure the filters have been cleaned along with the heat exchanger, and also that the condensation line is attached properly and also clean as well. Now that the furnace has been running for a few minutes, we want to make sure that the ducts are actually producing heat. So using a thermal imaging camera, a temp gun, an anemometer, or even your hand, we're going to check to make sure the supply ducts are functioning properly. If the home you're inspecting is equipped with hydronic heating, this is also another system you want to test. Now with hydronic heating, you have to be aware of the jurisdictional requirements in your area. In addition, if the system is isolated or shut off, you don't want to open or close any valves without getting written permission from the sellers. Some of the items that you want to inspect with the system include the circulators, the air separators, temperature and pressure gauges, as well as any sort of armored cable required for the electrical contacts. After checking the components for the hydronic heating system, if you do have a thermal imaging camera, now is a great time to check the lines to make sure they're working. Alright, so one of the last things we want to inspect with the HVAC system are the plenums. So we want to make sure that they're nice and clean. We have filters that are pointed the proper way and they're also clean, and making sure that all the openings in the ducts are sealed to prevent any sort of watermarks and condensation from forming. If you're inspecting a house and it is equipped with a humidifier, you want to test its operation. This starts with making sure that the water supply line is open, and then you want to turn up the humidistat. After turning up the humidistat, check the operation to make sure there are no leaks and that the solenoid valve, if equipped, is working. You also want to make sure that the tray or the pad is clean from any sort of debris, as well as checking for any corrosion. If the house you're inspecting has a gas fireplace, you may want to test it. Now first off, if the gas valve is shut off to the appliance, you'll want to ask the sellers if it's okay for you to turn it on. Alternatively, you can ask the sellers to have it turned on for you before you arrive. When you get to the unit, you want to check inside for any sort of debris, corrosions, and watermarks. Also, take a look inside the actual firebox to make sure there's not excessive soot and debris inside as well. It's always recommended to test a blower fan if there is one equipped, as well as if there are any sort of children in the occupying area, you may want to suggest installing metal screens. Lastly, take a look at the exhaust to make sure there's no evidence of soot, which may be due to improper combustion or gas calibration. Now that we've completed the HVAC portion of the inspection, we're going to move over to the plumbing. So this begins with the tanked or tankless water heater. So first off, you want to identify the unit, and this begins with taking a photo of the data plate. This is going to tell you the capacity, the BTU ratings, the age of the appliance, along with a few other items that you want to put in the report. Now that we've identified the water heaters, we want to begin the inspection process. So this begins with checking for any watermarks or corrosions and active leaks. We also want to check the vent pipe orientation and securement, and making sure that the TPR valve is not leaking, has a proper discharge tube, as well as having isolation valves on the cold side. Once we're completed with the water heaters, we now want to identify where the location of the main water shutoff is, as well as identifying the type of water supply piping and drain piping inside the house. Alright, so now that we've completed the HVAC and plumbing portions in the mechanical room, we're going to be moving over to the electrical panel. Now most standards and practices do not require that you remove the dead front, but if you want to do so, make sure that it's not energized using a Voltec. Wearing proper personal protective equipment is recommended for your face, hands, and feet. If you decided to take off the dead front for the electrical panel, now you can look inside for debris, watermarks, and improper installations. You also want to identify the main disconnect rating along with the circuit branch wiring. Lastly, if you decide to test the AFCA and JFI breakers, you want to leave a note for the sellers to let them know that you did this in case they need to reset any appliances. One note about housekeeping is that it is very common to find sellers storing items in mechanical rooms that shouldn't be there. This includes paints, bar saws, vehicle batteries, as well as kitty litter boxes. If you see these items, you'll want to recommend that they be removed so that you don't damage the appliances inside the house. Now, because this home is constructed using ICF or insulated concrete forms, you want to make sure that the insulation is protected from both heat and mechanical damage, as it is not in this home. Modern homes will have GFI protection throughout the inside and outside of the dwelling, especially near water sources such as bathrooms and kitchens. You want to test these using an outlet analyzer that has GFI testing capabilities, or using the test function on the receptacle itself. Now that we've completed the inspection in the mechanical room, we're going to start inspecting the bathrooms. First, what you want to do is inspect the sink and the bathtub or shower unit for any sort of surface defects and chips, as well as corrosion. Once it's safe to run the fixtures, what you want to do is turn on the hot water to make sure that it's hot, shut that off, turn on the cold water to make sure that's cold, and then you can mix the two and run them for about 10 minutes. Every 2 to 3 minutes, you want to make sure that there are no leaks or spills occurring. Alright, so now we're moving on to the water closet or the toilet. So just like the basin and the bathtub and shower, you want to check for any sort of surface defects inside the bowl, the lid, and the seat as well. After that, you want to make sure there's a shutoff valve installed. You want to check for securement, as well as checking to make sure that the fill and the flush valves are working properly. While you're running the plumbing fixtures, you want to be checking underneath the sinks or behind the bathtubs if permissible for a few items including leaks, P-traps, proper sloping, proper materials that are used, as well as provisions for venting. Alright, so now we're going to be starting the interior inspection inside the home. So this starts off with testing doors if there are some in the room. We're going to be checking the ceiling for any watermarks or any sort of damage. We're also going to be testing the windows for operation, any damage or missing hardware, along with any failed seals, and also checking the blinds. Lastly, we're going to be checking the receptacles to make sure they're properly wired. When you're starting to begin your interior inspection of the house, you want to be looking out for smoke and carbon monoxide alarms. Generally, you want to find out when their installation or expiration date was or is, and these are typically 7 to 10 years from the manufacturer date. The last thing that we're going to do in the basement is to check for water intrusion at the exterior perimeter walls. An easy way to do this is using a flashlight to check the baseboards for any water damage or any water marks. You can also use a scratch awl to pull the baseboards away from the exterior wall, and this may show signs of water damage or possible mold as well. An alternative method is by lifting the carpet and taking a look at the smooth edge of the carpet nail strips below. However, this should only be done without causing any damage to the building materials. Now that we're completed with the basement, we're going to be moving our way up to the main floor and the upper floor. So of course, as you're going up the stairs, you want to make sure that our handrails are installed. When inspecting exterior doors, there's a few things you want to be checking for. First off, you want to make sure that it opens and closes smoothly. You want to make sure that all the hardware is intact and operating properly, such as deadbolts. You also want to check for weather stripping, such as around the entrance and the sides, as well as the door sweep. Also, check to make sure that the doorbell is engaged, and of course that all the hinges have the proper fasteners installed. Alright, so now we're about to enter the attic. So a few housekeeping items. First off, you want to get a tarp or some sort of catchment system to get any sort of insulation falling from the attic space into the dwelling. Secondly, you want to clean your hands because you don't want to leave any smudges on the attic access. Lastly, as you're making your way up into the attic access, check for weather stripping and insulation on the hatch. Alright, so now we're going to perform a general inspection of the attic space in regards to the building signs. So what we're going to be looking for is roof and soffit ventilation if they're present. We're going to be checking for the type and the depth of insulation. And one really quick tip about checking soffit ventilation is shutting off your flashlight and looking for daylight. We also want to be looking for any sort of signs of attic rain. Now that we've finished the building science aspect of the attic space, now we're going to be looking at the structural components. Now most homes, the attic space and maybe the mechanical room will be the only two areas where the structural components are actually revealed. So things we're looking out for are damaged building material such as roof decking, altered trusses, maybe damaged rafters, and water damage inside. Also, you can find failing fasteners from time to time as well. After completing the attic inspection, our next task is to complete a thermal imaging scan. We're going to start in the mechanical room, which is where we started the interior inspection, and then we're going to work our way back to the top floor where we ended the interior inspection. One thing to keep in mind is you want to switch between looking at the display of your thermal imaging camera and also taking in the surrounding environment so you don't get tunnel vision. Thank you again for viewing this brief inspection process video. While we strongly recommend that you become well versed in your local codes, again, I want to remind you that home inspections are not code compliance inspections. If you have any suggestions or feedback for these videos, we'd love to hear from you. You can do so by sending us an email through our contact form on our website at homeinspectortraining.ca. See you in the next video.